Kelly was born in Belfast, but she's not an Ulster poet. She was raised in Leitrim. She started to write poetry seriously when she moved to Cork after completing her MA in Creative Writing in NUI Galway. I've seen her develop over the years at workshops organised by the Munster Literature Centre, and I was honoured in 2016 to be able to publish a debut chapbook of hers, Rapture. It's been one of the most enthusiastically greeted debuts by an Irish poet in the last few years. Already a number of major publishers are avidly interested in seeing her first manuscript whenever she might complete it. Her work is marked by an originality of phrasing and subject matter, an emotional vulnerability. And I think it's those two elements that make her work so popular with readers and poetry audiences. So would you please welcome Róisín Kelly.
Thanks for coming, everyone, and thanks to Pat and the Centre for having me at such short notice. I'm just going to read one poem from Rapture tonight. It's called Ode to Love. Gold stars above Leitrim's cut fields were almost enough once. But last week in Tesco, I heard a cry, that was my baby, my baby. Once I wore a rainbow scarf, and every shop front lit up for me. Once the foam-edged Atlantic seeded my eyes with the bright bulbs of lighthouses. Over coffee and croissants, men would glimpse my red danger. The breakfast table of love has wrecked many ships. Saturn's rings, an empty attic room, dust motes in sunlight. The only truth worth knowing, that we are alone. Yet love rises in me like water, a forest's dark holy well. I've been to such places, knelt by their mossy steps leading down. I've seen the wordless tokens left there by people, coins, shells, beads, and the silent ghosts of red rags tied to the trees. So Rapture is sort of infamously all love poems. I was sort of asked before if I felt I might write anything other than love poems. And at the time, I didn't realise that I would become quite political after Rapture. So for people who might not know, in Ireland, the right to life of the unborn is enshrined in the Constitution. And we're going to vote on that later this year to remove that. So there'll be more rights to abortion and more rights for women. And this poem might not sound like it's about that, but I was in Greece earlier this year, and I went night swimming in, the bioluminescent plankton that glows in the dark in warm seas. And I just began to realize the sort of disconnect between your body and yourself when your body legally in your own country doesn't belong to you. So that's what this is kind of about. And it's called Aliki, which is a peninsula on the island where I was staying. Aliki. On the beach I undress in the dark, naked and blind before the gods, below too many stars. The Aegean rises to my hips, rises within me. From here, I can see the glint of the closed metal coffee truck, the red flickering light of the Orthodox shrine by the olive. It is strange and frightening, like the glowing red pulse on my own body that even I am not allowed to touch. But in the water, my movements stir luminous plankton or algae, bright opal specks that drift from my wrists, from my cold breasts. They glow and swirl and die like shooting stars, turned on by my nakedness. They are kind. I never thought such tiny compassion could make me want to cry. How beautiful they are, mysterious creatures dazzling the same seas that Homer once looked on, that surrounded the ancient Greeks on all sides. When I begin to walk back, I will hide from the twin sons of any car I hear coming. All women learn to be shadows, crouching down low in the pines. Artemis, I can turn only to you in a world with such dim light to live by. Give me the flight of deer through the woods, fleeing the hunter's sharp spears. Help me decipher these sparkling trails like the Milky Way's dust in Morse code. Guide the small boat of my body back to myself. Tell me which path brings me home. A lot of these poems are going to start with, I was displaced. So I was in Cambodia last year, and it was about the time that more information was coming out about the mother and baby homes in Ireland, particularly the one in Tuam in Galway, where a septic tank was found with maybe 800 bodies of children who were born to unmarried mothers there, because Ireland has a history of incarcerating pregnant women. And in Cambodia, we visited one of the killing fields there where Cambodians were massacred in the 70s. So this poem isn't really so much comparing one atrocity to the other, but more examining the ways in which a mass grave is like another mass grave. So this is called Tuam. At Choing Ek, our guide points out the sugar palm's serrated bark, good for cutting throats. In these fields, a tree can be a knife, a mouth that knew only several joyful tastes of what should have been a lifetime's sugar, can now be a jawbone separated from its tiny skull. In times of heavy rain, bones and teeth and scraps of clothing surface in the mud. Our guide requests we do not touch them. It is as if, he says, the dead will not rest. This was once an orchard, watermelon grove. Now the land swells gently where the mass graves are, like the stipple of our lazy beds that predate the famine. Here, the sun rises like an apple, red and whole. At home, they told us not to taste it, but we let the sugar juices trickle down our chins, and now I reach out to the coloured bracelets hanging on the killing tree. Here, a tree can receive the heads of babies and hold for decades the brain bone fragments. Our guide says look, but I do not want to look. Sunlight touches the unstirring lake, the stupa's dusty glass, behind which 5,000 skulls gaze back at us, incurious. They lay in darkness for so long, the only sounds that reach them, birds and monkeys calling to their young, calls passed down through generations. 1 century before, 2 Irish boys uncovered a Galway Fields bone chamber. The missionaries who first came to anchor said the jungle temple was so terrible and ancient, they did not believe the natives capable of building it. This poem is called Highway of Tears. I first read about the Highway of Tears when I was 15 in the Sunday Times magazine, and it's a nickname for part of Highway 16 in British Columbia, which is infamous for the unsolved numbers of murders and disappearances of Indigenous women. There are no buses to their communities there, so they end up hiking to cities like Vancouver, and either a person or people are preying on them when they're hitchhiking, but no one has done anything. I think it's still the case today. So this is called Highway of Tears. There are deserts of the world beyond our ability to imagine. Ice-charred mountains, dark forest after dark forest, like so many closed eyes. Look for him in the shadows, because no one else will. So many of ye waiting on the road, prepared to pay the highest price, to reach a world that wants nothing to do with you. As you pass down to younger sisters, your old parkas, your warm boots, so you will pass down this legacy, to lie in the cold earth through short days and long nights, the headlights of cars and trucks going by, like merciless suns setting far too soon. Radio voices crackle and vanish. There is no signal here, only the wilderness silence that now seeps into each car. From this day on, every driver's face will be his face. Terrible moons watching through windshields as headlights illuminate the small pale posts of your severed thumbs, which for hundreds of miles mark the highway. Listen to the laughter of your sisters still living, combing each other's hair and dreaming in neon. How to tell them the city lights will not be theirs, as they were never yours, daughters of Canada. This is the fate you were born to be the wolves and the hawks and the things that rise in the dark, to turn your backs on the inland waste and shuffle west and west until the ocean appears, with its soft sound like snow, with its salt like the taste of grief at the back of a girl's throat. This poem is called Mary Ann MacLeod, who is Donald Trump's mother. She was from the Isle of Lewis in Scotland, and I think she had quite a poor life until she emigrated to New York. And she was once said to have said of her son, "What kind of son have I created?" So this is in her voice. Also, I've stolen the first line of this poem from Carolyn Forshey, so I'll just say that now. Mary Ann MacLeod. What you have heard is true. I have gone home with the spawning salmon. Pilgrims through the turquoise night, its Atlantic indigo suns. No one knows how we do it exactly, finding our way to the same river we hatched in, to lay our eggs in soft gravel and die. So do I return relentless, until the Isle of Lewis rises like a rocky dawn. This would have been your kingdom too, the salmon, the red deer, the blue hare's pale shadow, the blue men who live in the Minch, fallen angels who stir storms against ships. One of them was your father, oh, immensity of light and shadow, light on tinfoil crumpled sea, a waterfall over my life's west horizon, his blue body pressing me into the smell of sweet heather. Afterwards we lay together, and I thought, what kind of son have I created? What kind of son? You were not born until many years later, hatched in the gold dust of the west. My bonny babe, storm raiser, son of hell. If I could, I'd roll the earth like a stone through a lifetime of Novembers. Unrisen sun, dark oven of sky. But how my body flashes and twists in this new day, opals and pearls, a hard knowledge. I have done all I can, my wee man. I must split to the pink. A girl's apron dances on a line. A blue man sinks below the waves. A red deer lifts its head. A gannet dives. Salmon leap upstream. Just staying with the theme here. It's Trump, sorry. Has anyone here seen Lemonade by Beyonce? Yes. All right. Lemonade is Beyonce's visual album that came out last year. Stylistically and thematically, it's pretty amazing in the way it centers Black women's experience at the heart of like the story that's told about America, and their voices are non-existent in some cases. This is just sort of an homage to that, without trying to, it's hard. Not wanting to speak for anyone who are just starting to speak for themselves, but this is an homage. It was directly inspired by the colonial imagery in Beyonce's Lemonade, which shows Black women in the old houses that you would see in Louisiana and that kind of thing. And this is called Mar-a-Lago, which is Donald Trump's getaway in Florida, where that school shooting took place yesterday. Mar-a-Lago. The water is rising again, though it hasn't rained here for months. The bayou is coming to the door of her house, her white colonial house, where she rocks on the porch. She welcomes the bayou. The bayou remembers in the way all swamps remember, preserving past centuries like a jam of clotted green memories. The woman's dress is ruffled lemon cloth, a pale froth at her black throat. The sight of her would put a thirst on you, old man, as you work on the sugar plantation. But you will not drink. She has a sweet tooth, having known until now only bitter. The sun climbs higher and higher, a golden elevator to heaven, as she rocks on the distant porch. In her lap, a cat sleeping like a gun, on which she rests a ringed hand. Silver gleam on fur. Later, when the sun burns down to amber, she walks to the water's edge and climbs onto an alligator. Gliding down the swamp's slow river, she has nowhere in particular to go. The dark braid hanging on her back reminds you suddenly of that sycamore with its noosey rope, through which you once saw the low sun like a ruby, as if the earth was begging you to marry it. If only you had accepted then, promising to love its children as your own. Now you are the one who has been made to kneel, and look, your hands are bleeding. I'll just finish with this poem, and it is more of a love poem, just to finish off. kind of more to a place. I was helping out with the olive harvest in Portugal 2 weeks before Christmas, which was really cool. I know all about how olive oil is made now. So this is named after the valley where I was staying. Dominio Vale do Mondego. You beat the branches with a stick, so that olives fall as quickly as the days are passing. Every night at the press, the smell of crushed olives, like warm darkness you could eat. Here they eat their bread with olive oil and salt. At dawn the olive nets are glittering with frost. The harvest must be brought in before the solstice. Your flock of sheep must be brought in before night. The terraces in this valley are ancient. Pine needles make quiet the old Roman road. When I close my eyes, all I see is olives falling, and you bending to pick up a lamb, just as the pink terraces of dusk begin to fade. A shepherd, a farmer, efficient and practical man. But more than anyone, you know how an hour has no meaning. There is only a sheep's bell ringing in the distance between you and the time left in which you can find it. In this village of shawled widows, who might they call witch? At the river, I write your name on an apple and cast it into water as black as your name. Now, is it night? Is it day? It is neither. The air is a pure color. Over the valley, an eagle drifting forever. A turbine paused in turning on the mountain, its red bulb glowing on one blade. Olives rise from nets and hover mid-air. In the dream I had my first night here, your boat flies backward over silver water, and apple peel flies upward to your silver knife.
So I met Aleš Šteger for the first time last October at the Shanghai International Poetry Festival. Aleš didn't know, but I've been hearing his name whispered since 2004. Been hearing about Aleš Šteger from other Slovenian poets and literateurs ever since I've met my first Slovenian. He belongs to a generation of writers that started to publish right after the fall of Yugoslavia. His first poetry collection, published in 1995 when he was 22, sold out 3 weeks after the launch and signalled the arrival of a new generation of Slovenian artists and writers. He has been, along with Tamás Šolema, the go-to Slovenian poet for foreign poets to translate and to publish. He's been translated to over a dozen languages. Altogether, he has more than 33 books published in translation. The Book of Things, one of the most famous ones, published by Bow Editions in America. He himself has translated into Slovenian joints of poetry such as Pablo Neruda, Gottfried Benn, Ingeborg Bachmann, and his near contemporary, Duris Grünbein. He has unsurprisingly received all the prizes going in Slovenia. He has also received major honours from France and Germany. Please welcome Aleš.
Hello everyone, thank you Patrick, thank you for this invitation, it means a lot to me. As we have a small reunion, a Shanghai reunion almost here. I'm gonna read first a couple of rather old poems now already from the Book of Things, and then some really brand new translations. the Book of Things, usually we tend to describe reality, but I think that the poetic mind works differently. It's what is surrounding us that calls us, that speaks to us, also the objects, the animals, the plants. It's not the eyes and the tongue that writes the poems, it's more the ear. And that was one of the ideas that I had in mind while writing this Book of Things. All poems have been translated by Brian Henry. A died and didn't die, like his father A, like his grandfather, he drowned in the village graveyard. Drowned, but didn't drown. He went into the mud and into the dumb stones in the mud. Silent there now, forgetting, erasing, is there now and isn't. Because there is no place. He is without beginning and end. Someone died. No one. His name forgotten, like his father's and his grandfather's name. Sometimes a rattling of things. The one who went to bed sometimes gets up. The one who keeps vigil continues dying. Sometimes the unbearable terror of space searching for its voice. Sometimes the monotonous sadness of rain over streets. Gurgles when it rolls out of the sea. The sight of quartz in watches. Surely it is only A is dead. Whoever thinks he sometimes hears him should listen with the other ear. Whoever doesn't hear him will go on listening in vain. It's very unpredictable when objects start talking to us, start telling their poems. Occasionally it happens at breakfast. Egg. When you kill it at the edge of the pan, you don't notice that the egg grows an eye in death. It is so small it doesn't satisfy even the most modest morning appetite. But it already watches, already stares at your world. What are its horizons, whose glassy-eyed perspectives? Does it see time which moves carelessly through space, eyeballs, crack shells, chaos or order? Big questions for such a little eye at such an early hour. And you? Do you really want an answer? When you sit down, eye to eye behind the table, you're blinded soon enough with a crust of bread. Another occasion when objects, things start speaking. You drive on a highway, you have to stop, going to a toilet, and there it is, the hand dryer talking to you. Who speaks when you're not speaking in your own name? When you do not pretend to speak in the name of another, but there is the presence of a voice like the ghosts at a seance. Just retro lari fari cadabra abra, aha, aha. blah blah. It happens as if the wind would speak through you, as if the Bora speaks, the Koshava, the Passat, icy Siberian winds. It happens invisible while speaking in a clear voice, and they do not happen. Their return brings no changes, or indeed, somewhere between where the living brush against the dead, drops with which you have sprinkled their brow evaporate from your palms. Again you press the silver button on the plastic box. Again they came roaring, this time to warm your frigid fingers. Just abracadabra, aha, aha, blah blah. Because they bring nothing new. The gas station toilet is just like before, and you too were not changed. Only through your palms did something blow. You do not hold him, but sometimes he holds you. He has your lifelines, your handshake. He has no time, he who speaks, when you do not speak in your name, and no home, and no things of his own. And no name without a body, always on the road. And his path can also be yours, but yours can never be his. The last one, paperclip. You put down the paper confused. You only now notice the rusty imprint of a paperclip, a spiral sign for the way inward. She held together scraps of the world like an invisible thread. She warmed you, so enveloped in herself, like a fetus, like a snail, like a body in a mass grave. Her intention is not to add or take away from the world. Not a creator, the little paperclip. She only causes contact. Someone removed her. Who, why, you do not know. Nor how many sheets were lost. With a finger you go over the trace and start to read again. Before you opens a space within a space within a space. This poem has no end. And now I'm going to read a couple of poems from a book that was published, I don't know, two and a half years ago in Slovenia. And I read them for the first time, so it's also a special thing for me. The book is called Above the Sky, Beneath the Earth. Although actually the title should be in a way as a sequel to the Book of Things and the Book of Bodies, which are written after the Book of Things. The Book of the Unavoidable, but it's quite a heavy title, so in the end I dropped it. So why the unavoidable? Because sometimes I think there is so much beautiful poetry written in the world. Why writing more? But then poems sometimes can be very persistent, and one almost cannot avoid writing them. It's hard to tell. Perhaps better not telling. I have a white shirt. In the middle of the night, a dark body glows in it. White is the border. I live here, I'm spoken there. I have a white snowy, angelic shirt. I raise the collar, unfasten a button, roll up a sleeve. Language gets dirty. The angel gets dirty. The soul gets dirty. But I still live in my snowy clean, in my perfectly white shirt. A poet is born when she hears a voice. The voice is immortal. It is here, permanently, on loan. For a moment, the chirping of a blackbird drowns out the roar of the crowd. Love is an unstitched thread. The textile industry is sacred. Where did you hear that? In my ear? He writes, places marks, becomes excited, wastes his whole life on an apparently useless activity. No one notices his undertaking. Children run around, unaware, they erase his efforts. Despite everything, he is convinced that the fate of the universe is in his hands, depends on his persistence. What was uncovered countless times will be uncovered again. His activity prolongs the word foam, the word fan, the word this, the word presence. It prolongs the artful wailing that accompanies the seducer, poetry. Very baiters shake the towels they were lying on all day on the sand. What remains is an impression that will be erased again and again. What there is the revolt against the end of summer. Milk turns to ash, history to oblivion. A deer eats a weed in the garden of my dead mother. Milk turns to ash, history to oblivion. A deer eats a weed in the garden of my dead mother. A professor has proven that human history is the history of a continuous decrease in violence. Cruel cavemen, wild nomads, peasant uprisings. Nowadays, we are only concerned with raw food, social networks, gender equality. There is barely enough violence in the world to fill the daily newspapers, the professor says thoughtfully, and with a quick motion of his right palm he slaughters the mosquito that was sitting on the crease of his pressed pants. Love is a small kitten drinking water from a cracked dish. Love is a small kitten drinking water from a cracked dish. The Lord said, mountain. Snow fell and covered the Lord. The Lord called spring, and it came running out of the mountain. The Lord disappeared into the tops of pines. Summer blazed on the surface of the lake. The Lord watched a man who bathed himself in the Lord. Oh, murmured the Lord. How much of the Lord has to pass by so that one solemn man becomes purified? person is a shadow thrown by a letter. The letter goes everywhere. The shadow doesn't leave the cave. A person is a shadow thrown by a letter. The letter goes everywhere. The shadow doesn't leave the cave. As in sex, the body of the other in poetry is mystically unattainable. There are no laws, only farewells. One must abandon all words, as water in a delta abandons the riverbed that led it safely over land. Two tongues made out of rain will spell with water, in water, out of the water. You are, you are. Thank you. Look how the mountains arise. Mountains don't arise, the mountains are. Look, rain is being made. But rain isn't made, rain is. Look, a day is being born. But a day isn't born, a day is. I ran through this meadow like a child. Now my aged son walks through it. But it wasn't me running. I am. Like a virgin forest, we too have become cold. You, who goes into yourself, remember the echoes. Whoever digs into time injures eternity. Like a virgin forest, we too have become cold. You who goes into yourself, remember the echoes. Whoever digs into time injures eternity. Shall I fall into the great sky, into the pale stroke in the grey, into the trace that behind the feeling reveals that it does not exist, and though will return? Shall I fall, vanish, into the in-between like a mouse in the night flower, sleepless, and never awaken except in letters? Shall I fall and leave, because I love returning, because I am above the sky, beneath the earth, forever. My mother, who art in bodies, devastation is your name. Come to me at least in your exile. Your brutality occurs in poverty and plenty. Toss today at least a worthless crumb and forgive me my moments of weakness, when I try to steal more from life than you intend. Don't lead me once more into emptiness. May my bones be crushed when you caress me, Mother. Five, assertions. This is all the years have washed up. First, I loved you even before I existed. Second, my life is a drop of blank ink in the boundless night. Third, there is no end, only snow-covered mountain peaks. Fourth, The sea doesn't care about us. Last, there is no end. Only glaciers are dying. Thank you.
One of the most frequently translated contemporary Irish poets is Matthew Sweeney. It would be said of Matthew that he writes the sort of poem which does not get lost in translation. He's admitted himself that the texture of language, music and language, are elements of a poem which just simply do not interest him. I think it's a very interesting technical challenge to write an effective poem without recourse to those elements that make a lot of poems successful. I think it's the organic whole thought in a Sweeney poem which works as poems and which survive from language to language. As somebody who's very popularly translated yourself, very frequently translated, are you anyway conscious of writing the sort of poem which doesn't get lost in translation?
I can answer as a translator myself. I think it's generally, I think there are two groups of authors. One who speak only their own language and others who speak at least two, because it's a different experience of reality if you speak at least two, because you know that there are things that cannot be translated. It's true that in some cases musicality is a big issue. I started perhaps with less obvious musicality in my poems, and in the last two books, the last 10 years basically, I went into a very radical musicality in Slovenian. Not all of it can be translated. But I think it's just the way I have to go. And I don't care about the possibility of translation when I write, but I do write also in other languages while I'm writing in my mind. So perhaps this has a certain effect on the process of writing.
How do you mean you write in other languages as you write in Slovenian?
Very often I talk with authors, poets, and texts while writing. It's an ongoing conversation. And if you know a couple of poems by heart in other languages, then you don't translate them while talking to them. You return or you debate in a way in your own language, but having the original in front of you. So that makes it immediately a different space where poetry takes place. It's a space beyond the formality of one language, I would say.
And just one last question on the subject of translation before we move on. As somebody who translates a lot yourself, and as somebody who's very fluent in a number of other languages, do you collaborate with translators?
Yeah, a lot.
Do you advise a lot?
Yeah, I mean advice. I try to. I'm always open for questions, and if I can, I work together basically, eyes to eyes with the translator. But you can do it until a certain moment, and until here you can go. But then I have to motivate the translator to go further, to make something on his or her own. It's not in terms of poetry. I'm not a control freak. I think that I try to make it as clear as possible what's going on in my language. But then I really try to encourage the translator to have a similar dance in his own language. I think poetry has to work. That's the first thing. That's translations only for information's sake. I think it's not what poetry is about. It's perhaps what philosophy is about. There has to be this small miracle of the event of poetry happening. Actually, they are not only giving a notion that something there was at the beginning, but now it's lost in translation.
Róisín, the mistake a lot of people make when they try to write political poetry is they end up writing some sort of propaganda that sets out to convert or persuade, and that's one kind of translation which the poetry gets lost. I think you've successfully avoided that in your political poems here tonight. I mean, are you aware of trying to avoid losing the poetry when you're writing about or inspired by political events?
I don't think so, because when I was in my undergrad, when I was writing poetry, it would all be love poetry as usual, and I think then there was that earthquake in Haiti, and I was like, oh, I should be writing about this because this is awful, and I wrote a poem about it, and it was just, awful, preachy, just terrible. So since I just sort of accepted that I'll write the poems that are coming to me in the moment, I don't worry about that, because it's just happened very naturally, and they're the ones I'm happy to be writing. Yeah.
And I got the impression from your introduction that being politically woke is a recent development for you.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah,
it's been growing. I'd say 5 years ago, I might not have described myself as a feminist, and now it's hardcore now. Yeah, which I'm glad about. But yes, very much more politically awake, which is it's good to be politically aware, but I guess at times it can be a bit crushing as well. I think that can be a problem for a lot of people. Yeah, it's sometimes easier to look away, and in some cases I wouldn't blame anyone for looking away, because it's hard to deal with everything in the world. Like, if we were to truly feel everything in the world, we'd never get anything done. So, yeah.
That there are, to my mind, fashions and agendas that prevail in the poetry world that almost feel certain poets, make certain poets feel obligated to write in a certain way. I mean, back in the 90s, an awareness grew in Ireland that perhaps there were many Irish poets who wrote the sort of Irish poem that would be popular in America, and most especially popular with Irish American academics who wanted to write papers about Irish poems and who wanted to invite poets to their colleges and so on. And I get the impression too that while in America the emerging poetries of identity among Native Americans and Chicanos and Asian Americans and African Americans is a very important development. I get the impression that it's reached a stage now where many poets of those backgrounds almost feel obligated, or they feel necessary as part of their career advancement to write poems of that kind, Now, there was a time when every poet out of Eastern Europe was expected to write something political. I mean, were you the first generation in Slovenia who felt liberated from that sort of thing?
No, I wouldn't say. I think we have a very strong tradition in Slovenia of authors and poets who have been politically extremely engaged, but you wouldn't read it necessarily from their work. I mean, they've been engaged in other ways, even getting into politics, occasionally very misfortunate. I think it's a better idea trying to conquer the States with Irish poets than with first ladies, as we do. Myself, I started to 20 years ago. I started to write also prose, and actually this became much more direct, political. Somehow, of course, it's obvious you can develop characters in different way as you do in poems. I have to say, in poetry, I've never felt really the necessity to address issues directly. I thought always of poetry as something that has to travel through time, so through centuries, and it's very hard then to retrace what was meant at the beginning if one connects it directly, not metaphorically, to something.
And I think Róisín has very successfully written that kind of poem, the sort of poem
it's very hard
about a political issue that will still have relevance after the political issue is resolved, after the political issue becomes history rather than current affairs. It will still be a very readable and illuminating poem to read. We still have time to open the floor to a couple of questions. Anybody want to ask something? Okay, we'll go to the bar.